How's everybody doing? Yeah, we are too. Right, we're in Esther chapter 4. Esther chapter 4. We got through a good chunk of the chapter. We got down to about verse 14. And so, in talking about here the discourse between Mordecai and Esther, and of course, Mordecai had been mourning. He'd been in sackcloth and ashes, and he was outside the king's gate, and the word came to Esther. And so Esther sent out clothes for him to put on to get out of his state of mourning, but he would not. And then we see the discourse between the two, and so Esther's not able to come out and talk to him face to face, being the queen and being a part of in the king's court, or not the king's court, but the king's household. And so we see that there was somebody that communicated back and forth. One of the eunuchs that served her went and talked to him and came back. And so she finds out, she gets a copy of the edict that went out, the proclamation out to the nation about the Jews being killed. And so then we got to verse 13. It says, "And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, 'Do you not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews?'" She, being a Jew, did she think that she was going to be able to escape the destruction that was coming? No. The law was the law. And so, being the fact that she was a Jew, she would also die during that same time. So then verse 14, it says, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish." And so first I want to look at that. We talked a little bit about this is where we ended. The fact of Mordecai knowing the prophecies, obviously that God is going to protect his seed and the lineage that leads to the Messiah. And so he knew that if Esther didn't stand up and do something, that God was going to still protect his people. May not have been all of her people. He was confident here that if she didn't arise, that you and your father's house will perish. So maybe just the ones there in the capital would die. But if she didn't stand up, she was going to die, and so would her family, and their lineage would be gone. Yet he knew that God would still come out and protect the Jews. It's not stated there, but he says it will arise from another place. So not there in the capital, but somewhere else. And so we can see Mordecai's faith and understanding that God will still protect his people. May not be all of them, but to protect the lineage. And so then he says, "Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" This is probably the most famous verse, the most famous saying of the book of Esther. And the fact that he tells her, "How do you not know that you have been put in the position you are in for this exact moment?" Now, as we read through the book, is that the case? Yeah. We have the book. We can sit here and read from start to finish and go, yeah, of course, she was put there for that, for this specific moment. But think about it being in Mordecai's shoes. He doesn't know what's going to happen in the future. He doesn't have the book that we have that details everything that happens. We can skip over this and jump over to where Esther saves her people and everything's fine. But Mordecai says, "How do you not know that the position that you're in, you are there just for this?" She didn't. He didn't either. It could have been for something else down the road. But it was. And, she has to think about that. She has to think about the fact that, she has a responsibility. She has the the authority more than anybody else to go to the king and to speak with him. And so it's just something to think about. You think about that in our individual lives. Each one of us are in different places in our lives. We all have different kind of jobs, or the places that we go, the things that we do. How do we not know that we are in that position for whatever moment may come? It may not be now. Maybe 5 years down the road. Maybe 10 years down the road. Maybe it happened 5 years ago. I don't know. But you think about it, the opportunities that we have, what does that tell us? We need to be ready. We need to be looking for those kind of opportunities. And so no matter where we're at in our lives, basically, it doesn't matter the job, doesn't matter the place, doesn't matter the group of people that we're around. We could be in that position. God put us there providentially for a reason. And so we need to be looking for those opportunities. It's something we can pull from this. We can't see it now. We don't have the book written of our life showing everything from start to finish like Esther here. She didn't. But we, just like her, we don't have that book written, so we don't know. And so we need to be looking for those opportunities in our life. And so she had an opportunity to do good and do the right thing. And she needed to accept that responsibility. But also the consequences for that. Could it have been bad? Yeah. Could they have been good? Yes. And we see that they're going to end up being good. She needed to do what she could. She was in that position, and she has the ability to say no, right? Yeah. She could have said no easily. Said, you know what? No, I'm comfortable where I'm at. I don't want to risk my life. She could have. And so you think about it, in our life and the opportunities that come, do we have the choice to say no? Yeah. And so, maybe think back the opportunities that we missed. Did we say no in those opportunities? Yeah. And so look towards the future and opportunities that we have to either affect somebody's life, to teach them about the gospel, to be a good example for those that are around us. We need to be looking for those opportunities. And so, verse 15, it says, Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and I also will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Think about that. She was confident. Not really confident, but she was made up in her mind that she was going to do this, and no matter what happened, she was still going to move forward. She was still going to jump on that opportunity. The consequences could have been she lost her life, but she decided that it was worth it, that she was in that opportunity for a reason.
Well, it was the people for her.
Yeah.
Because if she didn't stand up and go to the king, all the people were going to die. And she may have still died. And then if she went to the king and he killed her, well then, I think her help would have came, like Mordecai said, from another place if she couldn't get it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's a lot of implication with things that is going on here. You think about what's going through her mind. We talked about. She said that she hasn't been around the king in 30 days. What could be going through her mind? He's unhappy with me. Something's wrong. Why he hasn't requested me to be around him for 30 days, a month. So she's got these things going through her mind. And she chose to do it. And she made up her mind that no matter what happened, she was going to. And so she asked Mordecai, she really commands Mordecai to those that are all in that city to fast for her. What usually associates with fasting?
Prayer and fasting.
Prayer, right? So we read James 5 and verse 16. Okay, so they spent time in prayer for this opportunity that she has, and the outcome from it. And fasting and prayer always work together and through Scripture, and we see that. And so, how often do we how often do we stop and pray before a big decision in our life? We should. Here, she took 3 days. So, those 3 days was time to think, to reflect, and to be able to, have the courage to do what she needed to do. Because that's what she's doing. She's trying to get the courage. She's trying to prepare herself for this. And she spends that time in prayer. And so, we should do the same thing. If we do some big things, we need to spend time in prayer because, God is there for us as Christians. It always has been, always will be for us. And so, verse 17, it says, "So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him." Now, it's interesting, who has been making the commands to this point? Mordecai has, right? Mordecai has been commanding her not to speak about her heritage. He's commanding her to do all of these different things, and then she turns around and says, "Okay, now I command you to do this," and they did. And so you can see their relationship and that they have, and there was mutual respect they had for one another. And Mordecai and all the Jews did exactly what she requested of them. And so that ends chapter 4. Any questions or comments on chapter 4? This is probably the most popular chapter we think about the book of Esther. And as the rest of the chapter, we're going to see a lot of things happen. But, that verse, the pinnacle verse of this book, really. All right, we'll start in chapter 5 here. I've got some more handouts. Sorry, Caleb. What's that? You want to pass these down? Chapter 5 of Esther. It's going to pick up right where we left off in chapter 4. What's that?
No.
I'll just start with verse 1, and we'll read a section here. But verse 1, it says, "Now it happened on the 3rd day." So what is the 3rd day? What's that talking about? Yeah. So she had commanded Mordecai and all the Jews in the capital to spend time in prayer and fasting. And so that was 3 days. And so the 3rd day here, we have, she is now ready to go in front of the king. And so somebody want to read verse 1 through verse 8, please.
Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said."
All right, so on the 3rd day, she puts on her royal robes. And so She prepares herself to go in front of the king, putting on her royal apparel. And so, the king had not seen her for 30 days, and so this could be a benefit to him. He has not seen her for 30 days. As we've talked about, she was very beautiful, and we see that back in chapter 2. And so for her getting prepared, putting on her royal apparel, she goes and stands in the inner court. And it says she stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while he sat on his throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it's weird, this picture that we get here. She comes to this inner court, and so we can see that there's an inner court, and then they've got the king's house, and there's probably, the house where the women stayed, his harem, and maybe her house, and things like that are all in this area. And this inner court would have been the place where work was obviously being done. And so he is now sitting on his throne. It says facing the entrance of the house. So he is facing towards, possibly, I think it's her house, where she was at. She comes out into that inner court to speak to him. And so verse 2, it says, so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And so when he sees her, she finds favor in his sight. He then delighted in her, showed grace to her by reaching out the golden scepter in his hand. She goes near and touches the top of that. Now, there is, if you're reading the Septuagint, so the Septuagint and some of the Apocrypha that add to what we see here, they add a bunch of drama to this by saying that she fainted and collapsed, and he jumps up and runs to her and grabs her and picks her up and then touches the scepter to her neck. And so they add this like romantic thing to what had happened here. It's just interesting that they add that. It's just some, to the Apocrypha and what they add to the book of Esther. Remember, I said there were several verses added in the Apocrypha to the book of Esther. And that's one of the things said there. But that's not indicated at all. She finds favor in his sight. He reaches out like he would do with anyone else and shows grace to her. She touches it, and now she's safe. She's not going to die. She is now able to speak to the king. And so verse 3, and the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. Where have we seen that before? Yeah, I didn't think about that. Joseph.
I'm thinking Herodias
That's what I was thinking of.
and John.
And somebody read Mark chapter 6, verse 22 and 23.
And when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod, and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee. And he sware unto her, whatsoever thou shalt ask of me, I will give it to thee, unto half of my kingdom.
All right, so we've seen this, we see this later on with Herod. He does the same thing. He's like, I'll give you anything you want up to half the kingdom. So, she's in a pretty powerful position right now, isn't she? She could get anything that she wants. She could have at that moment said, you know what? Maybe I want something else. Maybe I want to do something else. And so she didn't. She chooses to stick to what she was doing. So we find verse 3. She, in Mark chapter 6, the request that was given to her or to Herod was an evil request, and hers is not going to be. So there's a difference there. But pulpit commentary stated this. I thought it was interesting. So the practice of granting requests beforehand is one common among Oriental monarchs. Sometimes no limit at all is placed to petitioner's liberty of choice, seldom any less wide limit than that of the present passage. And so it was something that happened a lot, this practice. It says, according to Herodotus, there was one day a year in which the king was bound to grant any request made by a guest at his table. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's interesting that Herodotus writes about this and says, hey, there was a day, a year, that the king, whoever was at his table, if they made a request, he'd have to give it to him. And so, interesting, but it was a practice among these monarchs to do similar things that we see here. And so, he's giving her the opportunity of anything she wants. So in verse 4, so Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Interesting. Because there's a lot of things involved here. And so, here, instead of telling, first off, why didn't she just tell him what she wanted? You thought about that? Why didn't she at just this moment say, there is Haman who wants to kill my people, and this is what he's done. Here's the edict. I'm a Jew. She could have done all of that right now. Why? Could be, yeah.
It's very tactful. She set the stage.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. She needed to show, he's going to show his character in a little bit.
Yeah, it's tactful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think about the whole situation, and just to run in there and him being caught off guard, she set the stage to say, hey, here's some important stuff.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, I think she's using wisdom here. Do you think God providentially is having a part in this too? I think so. Because of what we're going to see happen with Mordecai. But for Haman, Haman at the end of this chapter, he's going to start building a gallows for Mordecai. He wants him dead. And so all of chapter 6 is probably my favorite chapter because of what happens there. He gets to eat crow. But all of this is going to happen. The king is going to elevate Mordecai to an amazing position. He's going to bless him. He's going to, all of these things. And then Haman's going to fall pretty hard. And so, there's a lot of wisdom in there. I think in a sense, she's buttering him up. She's getting him ready for what's going to happen. But now, another thing that's interesting about this, many commentators state that this is very, very rare of what happens here. And what I mean by that is, Poet Commentary was one of them that stated this. Such an invitation as this was very unusual. Ordinarily, the king and queen dined separately, each in their own apartments, family gatherings, however, not being unknown. But for the queen to invite not only the king, but also another male guest, not a relation, was a remarkable innovation and imitation, and must have seemed to the fortunate recipient of the invitation a high act of favor. So, by her saying, King, I want to have a feast with you, but also Haman, that really feeds into Haman's attitude here later. He's like, oh, wow, look how great I am. She requested me specifically to be able to be at this feast with her. That doesn't happen. And so it's just making his pride and arrogance just get more and more and more. Of course, was she the one that was causing him to be prideful? No. That's his choice. He's hardening his heart. He's doing these things himself. But she's got a plan. And so notice it says here that she wants them to today to the banquet that I have prepared for them. This word banquet is the same word used in chapter 1. What was the banqueting in chapter 1? The partying, drinking fest. Now, the word means feast, can be used as the word feast in other places. And so the context really determines it. Now, in this verse, I think it means food. It means eating. But we're going to see in verse 6, this is at the banquet of wine. Now, there's going to be a difference there. And so she has prepared this feast, and she wants Haman, she wants the king to come and eat this meal together. And so verse 5, it says, then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. And so he calls for Haman. He says, come quickly. That means you drop whatever you're doing right now and you get here. The king's excited. You know, he knows this is important because she's not going to risk her life to do something just not very important. So he knows whatever she's requesting is very important or big. So he's, in a sense, he's excited to hear what she has to say. But he's also intrigued. He wants to know. He wants to know why she's not telling him right now, why she's preparing this feast. And so he's saying, you need to tell him to get here immediately. Drop what he's doing and get here. And so then verse 6, it says, at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done. And so, he is now ready and wanting to know what she was asking. Now, the banquet of wine, it's a time, it's stated as a time of drinking wine. Barnes says this, after the meats were removed, it was customary in Persia to continue the banquet for a considerable time with fruits and wine. And so one person stated it's kind of like having coffee. After you have your meal, you go outside and some people have coffee and cookies or whatever. I don't drink coffee, so I don't know. But I don't drink it all the time. But the idea there is of the two separate times of having of a meal. So they had the meal, then at this after part where they had the fruit and wine, or the fruit and wine, he asked this question. He's like, what is going on? So verse 7 says, then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition, fulfill my request, and let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I prepare for them. And tomorrow I will do as the king has said. She said, I will do it tomorrow, but I want you to come to another feast. So, think about his anticipation of what is going on here. What is she asking? What is she getting at? And so I think this is an interesting quote here. This is by Matthew Henry. He said, to her prudence as she sought more time to irrigate herself with the king. No, that's not irrigate. Ingratiate herself with the king. Or that her heart failed her as she did not find sufficient courage to make it known without further time for prayer. Or that it was due to God's overruling providence, which would use the intervening time prior to that second banquet to make the granting of Esther's petition absolute and certain. What he means by that is the things that are going to happen between now and the next feast are really going to set Haman up for the evidence that the king needs to say, yeah, he really did want this. Look what he's trying to do. Because ultimately what happens to Haman? He's going to hang on the gallows that he built, right? And so I think that's a big part of that, though, here of seeing what's going to happen to the evidence of what Haman's trying to do. But not only that, maybe it was the providence of God to seal or harden the heart of Haman here. Now, does God harden hearts? He did a Pharaoh, right? How did he harden Pharaoh's heart?
He gave Pharaoh choices that he had to make.
Yeah, gave Pharaoh choices. Does the same for us, because people like to go to that verse and say, well, it was God's fault that why Pharaoh did what he did. But if you read in the rest of the context, Moses also hardened the heart of Pharaoh. How did he do that? By the actions that he did and the things that he said. His astrologers and wise men also hardened his heart. Well, they weren't on Moses' side, but they did, because they told him at one point, this is not us. You need to listen to him. And he hardened his heart. And so how could what's going to happen now harden Haman's heart? Well, he's going to get more and more prideful. Verse 8 or verse 9 is going to start that. And so he has a choice here, and he's going to harden his heart even more to what he's doing. And so that brings us to verse 9. It says, so Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai.
Who was Haman that Mordecai should have trembled and bowed before him?
Well, he was second in command of the nation. That started back in chapter 3. Promoted Haman. He gave him a seat above all the princes, so it was basically second in command. And so the actions of what led to this was the fact that he really wanted everybody around him to bow down and worship him. Now, we see chapter 3, he wants people to worship him. Now what does he want people to do? Or Mordecai specifically. Tremble. What does he mean by that? What does it mean by that? He wanted to be able to walk by Mordecai and Mordecai just break down in fear of him. That's what he wanted. Not only did he want him to worship him in chapter 3, now he wants him to just be scared and tremble. What is that going to do to Haman if he did? Yeah, it's going to be more prideful. It's going to be like, well, look what I've done. This man is just inferior to me. Look at him tremble and scared of how powerful I am and what I can do to him. That's what he wants. And so it says that he was joyful with a glad heart. Why was he joyful? Yeah, he got invited for another feast. Just got done with an amazing feast with the king and the queen. So he looks at himself as extremely important. He's going to say that here in a little bit. And so he's extremely joyful. He's happy about what's going on. He's got his proud heart. But really that joy is his pride. His pride's growing. And that joy quickly turns into hate, doesn't it? It says he was filled with indignation. So again, he's going back to what he was like in chapter 3 when Mordecai didn't bow down to him and worship him. Now he's just, his hatred, that fire, that desire to kill him has just enraged him again. And so he goes from being excited and happy to extremely angry. Who does that sound like? Sounds like Ahasuerus, huh? Yeah, the king. That's how the king was. And so he wanted to make sure that Mordecai pays for his actions. And so that brings us into the next part there. But I want to stop right there. We'll pick up here next week. We'll finish out this and then get into my favorite chapter, chapter 6. Any questions or comments? All right. Thank you guys for your time.